Reinhard Gehlen. Munich, May 1945. Hitler's thousand-year Reich has vanished in an instant. Across Germany, city after city lies in smoldering ruins. Berlin is a wasteland. Hamburg, a skeleton of stone. In Nuremberg, military tribunals are being assembled to prosecute the horrors of war. Thousands of Nazi officers are being rounded up, interrogated, or simply swallowed by the void of prisoner-of-war camps. Their names are meticulously catalogued on blacklists. The hunt is so relentless that escape seems impossible. But in the Bavarian Alps, not far from Munich, amidst the desolate valleys and silent pine forests, a surreal scene is unfolding. Reinhard Gehlen, the former chief of Foreign Armies East, Wehrmacht intelligence, is quietly supervising a group of loyal subordinates. They are burying 52 heavy steel safes. Inside lies a treasure trove, the most detailed intelligence files on the Soviet Red Army ever compiled. Information meticulously gathered throughout the bloodiest years of the war. Just weeks later, the unthinkable happens. Gehlen finds himself sitting across from American intelligence officers, not as a war criminal facing a cell, but as a potential partner. Gehlen, the man who spearheaded the intelligence apparatus for the invasion of the Soviet Union, a conflict that claimed 27 million lives, saw the massacre of millions of civilians, and the starvation of countless POWs, was now on the CIA's payroll. Instead of a prison cell, he was given his own headquarters in Pullach, near Munich. Instead of facing trial, he was shielded by his former enemies. By 1956, this same man was appointed the first president of the BND, West Germany's foreign intelligence agency. How did this happen? How did a potential war criminal secure power instead of punishment? And what was inside those 52 safes that was so valuable, Washington was willing to trade justice for information? Subscribe now for more deep dives into history. Leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? It might be a quiet midnight in your city, but right here, we are uncovering the truth. Erfurt, April 3, 1902. Reinhard Gehlen was born into a traditional Prussian family where military honor and discipline were the highest virtues. His father, Walter Gehlen, was an artillery officer who had served in the Imperial German Army under Kaiser Wilhelm II. In 1918, as the Great War ended, Germany spiraled into total chaos. The Kaiser abdicated and fled to the Netherlands. The Weimar Republic was born amidst a wave of violent riots and contempt from both the political left and right. The Treaty of Versailles, drafted by the Allies in June 1919, imposed harsh terms that would become a curse, shaping Germany's destiny for decades. The German army was slashed to a mere 100,000 men. War reparations were so astronomical they were impossible to pay. Territory was carved away, hyperinflation rendered currency meaningless. People carried bags of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Faith in the government eroded day by day. In 1919 in Munich, a small group of radical nationalists emerged, the German Workers' Party. Shortly after, Adolf Hitler joined, quickly seizing internal control and renaming it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. In 1920, at age 18, Gehlen joined the Reichswehr, the limited defense force permitted under the Weimar Republic. With only 100,000 troops allowed by Versailles, the Reichswehr was forced to become an absolute elite. There was no room for mediocrity, only the best were accepted. Gehlen passed every test, not through brute physical strength, but through his exceptional logical reasoning. In the German military, men like him were valued as highly as heroes on the battlefield. Throughout the 1920s, Gehlen rose steadily through the junior officer ranks, from second lieutenant to captain. He rotated through various units to master every facet of military organization. In 1923, Hitler and the famous General Ludendorff attempted a coup in Munich, but it failed miserably, and Hitler was imprisoned. German society seemed to be falling into an abyss of destruction. But by 1933, everything changed. Adolf Hitler, the man who had failed so spectacularly a decade earlier, became the Chancellor of Germany through legal elections. His Nazi party took control of parliament. Within months, Hitler transformed the Weimar Republic into a totalitarian state, seizing all power. The Nazi party began to permeate every state institution, including the military. The red flag with the black and white swastika flew over every public building. Hitler vowed to tear up the Treaty of Versailles, rebuild the German military, and restore the fatherland's status as a superpower. In 1935, Gehlen was selected for the War Academy in Berlin, the most prestigious school for German staff officers. Only the most brilliant officers with the highest leadership potential were admitted. Gehlen graduated in 1937 with solid marks. He wasn't top of his class, but in terms of organization and systems analysis, he had few equals. He was assigned to the Army General Staff in Berlin. Meanwhile, Hitler was preparing for war. In 1936, he moved troops into the Rhineland, a blatant violation of Versailles, yet Britain and France did nothing. In 1938, he annexed Austria in a bloodless unification. Later that year, he demanded and was granted the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia following the Munich Conference. Again, Britain and France blinked. In 1939, Hitler pushed further. In March, he seized the rest of Czechoslovakia. In August, he signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Stalin, a shocking deal between the Nazis and Communists to split Poland in half. On September 1, 1939, German troops poured across the Polish border. World War II had begun. By this time, Gehlen was a major on the General Staff, tasked with planning transportation and supplies for combat units during the Polish campaign. The campaign moved at a blistering pace. The Germans employed blitzkrieg, lightning war, on a massive scale for the first time. Bombers decimated Polish defenses. Armored divisions pierced the lines and raced into the rear, followed by motorized infantry to encircle and destroy isolated forces. Poland, despite fighting bravely with valiant cavalry and infantry, could not withstand the mechanized might of the Nazi armed forces, known as the Wehrmacht. Furthermore, on September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east as per their agreement with Hitler. In just 35 days, Poland collapsed completely. Warsaw surrendered on September 28th after heavy shelling and siege. The Polish government fled to Romania. The country was divided between Germany and the USSR. Gehlen didn't fire a single shot in this campaign, but his role was no less critical. After the victory in Poland, a strange lull occurred on the Western Front, the so-called phony war. German and Allied troops faced off across the border, but neither side attacked. Britain and France had declared war, but they hoped to avoid a total conflict. Hitler had no intention of waiting. He ordered preparations to attack the West, defeat France, and drive the British off the continent once and for all. The original plan was conventional, an attack through Belgium and the Netherlands, much like in 1914. But General Erich von Manstein proposed a bolder gamble. Feint an attack on Belgium, while the main force punched through the Ardennes forest, a dense, mountainous region the French thought was impassable for tanks, to strike straight for the English Channel and cut the Allies off. Hitler approved. Gehlen, along with hundreds of other staff officers, worked tirelessly to turn this daring plan into reality. On May 10, 1940, Germany attacked the West. The Wehrmacht moved into Belgium and the Netherlands as expected, baiting the Anglo-French forces to move north to stop them. Simultaneously, the armored divisions of Generals Guderian and Rommel tore through the Ardennes, completely shocking the French and racing westward toward the sea. Within 10 days, German panzers had advanced nearly 300 kilometers, severing Allied lines. British and French troops were trapped at Dunkirk. The Netherlands surrendered in 5 days, Belgium in 18. On June 14th, German troops marched into Paris. On June 22nd, France signed an armistice in the exact same railway carriage where Germany had signed its surrender in 1918. It was a calculated humiliation by Hitler. In just 6 weeks, France, a global military powerhouse, had collapsed. It was one of the most spectacular and shocking military victories in history. General Franz Halder, chief of the General Staff, took notice of Gehlen's work. Halder was an incredibly demanding man who rarely gave praise, but he assessed Gehlen as an officer with exceptional organizational and planning abilities. The name Reinhard Gehlen was starting to carry weight. He was promoted to major, then lieutenant colonel, and given increasingly vital assignments. But the victory in France carried a dangerous side effect. After defeating France, Hitler and many German generals became overconfident. They began to believe the Wehrmacht was invincible, that Blitzkrieg could crush any foe, and that no one could stop the greatest army in the world. Yes, the victory was spectacular, but if France had better military leadership, or if they had reacted faster, the campaign might have ended differently. Furthermore, Germany had not yet defeated Britain. The Luftwaffe failed to knock out the RAF during the Battle of Britain in 1940, and the plan to invade the UK was scrapped as too risky. Most importantly, the Soviet Union remained a massive enigma to the east. Stalin had a pact with Hitler, but no one believed it would last. Both sides were preparing for an inevitable clash. In late 1940 and early 1941, Gehlen was called in to help plan Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the largest military operation in human history. Hitler decided to break the pact with Stalin and destroy the USSR before turning back to deal with Britain. The plan was simple: strike a lightning blow, destroy the Red Army in weeks, capture Moscow and key cities, and force a surrender before winter arrived. Gehlen studied the numbers, and the more he studied, the more worried he became. The Soviet Union was terrifyingly vast. From the Polish border to Moscow was over 1,000 kilometers, double the distance from the German border to Paris. To the Urals, it was 3,000 kilometers. If the Soviets retreated east and kept fighting, how far would the Wehrmacht have to go? The Soviet population was nearly 200 million, double that of Germany. Even if the Red Army lost millions of men, they could mobilize millions more. Germany had no such manpower reserves. And then there was the Russian winter. It would arrive in October. If the campaign didn't end by then, German troops would be fighting in a lethal cold they were not prepared for. Gehlen submitted these concerns in his reports. He recommended preparing winter clothing for the entire army. He suggested stockpiling more fuel and ammunition. He warned that the campaign could last longer than expected. His advice was dismissed. Hitler and many generals believed the Red Army was weak, pointing to their poor performance in the Winter War against Finland, 1939 to 1940. Hitler predicted the campaign would end in 3 months before the first snow fell. No need for winter gear, no need for long-term logistics. Just move fast and hit hard. Gehlen felt a deep sense of unease, but he was only a lieutenant colonel. He couldn't argue. So he did his job, planning the logistics for the initial phase of the invasion. On June 22, 1941, at 3:15 a.m., over 3 million German troops, along with allies from Finland, Romania, Hungary, and Italy, stormed across the Soviet border on a front stretching 2,900 kilometers. It was the largest invasion in history. 3 massive army groups attacked simultaneously, north toward Leningrad, center toward Moscow, and south toward Ukraine and Kiev. The Red Army was caught completely off guard. Despite numerous intelligence warnings, Stalin refused to believe an attack was imminent and forbade defensive preparations to avoid provoking Germany. As a result, thousands of Soviet aircraft were destroyed on the ground on day 1. German panzer divisions advanced with staggering speed. In the Battle of Minsk, 300,000 Soviet troops were captured. In Smolensk, another 300,000. In Kiev, the largest encirclement in history, 665,000 men were lost. The numbers were catastrophic. Western commentators predicted a Soviet collapse within weeks. German newspapers declared victory was at hand. But Gehlen, sitting in a makeshift office behind the front lines, looked at the data and saw something chilling. The Red Army was not collapsing. Yes, they were losing millions, but they kept fighting. New units appeared constantly. German intelligence had estimated the Soviets had 150 to 200 divisions. By August 1941, the Wehrmacht was facing over 300. Someone had miscalculated. Badly. Furthermore, a new type of tank appeared on the battlefield, the T-34. It was faster, more powerful, and better armored than anything the Germans had. And then, autumn arrived. In September and October, the rains began. Dirt roads turned into seas of mud. Tanks and trucks became bogged down. Progress slowed to a crawl. In October 1941, the Wehrmacht launched its final push for Moscow. Then the snow began to fall. The Russian winter of 1941 arrived early and was exceptionally brutal. Temperatures plummeted to -30°C, then -40°C. Snow piled up over a meter deep. The wind was razor sharp. German soldiers had no winter clothes. They were still in summer and autumn uniforms. Thousands froze to death. Tanks and trucks wouldn't start because the oil froze solid. Ammunition froze. Rifles jammed. Horses died in droves from the cold and lack of fodder. And most importantly, the Red Army struck back. On December 5, 1941, Stalin mobilized fresh Siberian divisions, soldiers accustomed to fighting in ice and snow, and launched a massive counteroffensive. The exhausted Germans were pushed back from Moscow. For the first time since the war began, the Wehrmacht was defeated. For the first time, they had to retreat. German generals panicked. Some suggested a strategic withdrawal, but Hitler ordered not one step back. Hold every inch of ground. Generals who disagreed were fired, including the commander-in-chief, Walther von Brauchitsch. Hitler took direct command of the army himself. On December 11, 1941, following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Hitler declared war on the United States, a suicidal decision. Germany was now facing the combined industrial and human might of the USSR, Britain, and the US, an alliance that far outstripped Germany's resources. Gehlen sat in a cold base near Smolensk, working by candlelight because there wasn't enough electricity. Looking at the maps on the wall, he realized a terrifying truth. Germany had likely lost its chance to win the war. Barbarossa had failed. Moscow stood. The Red Army survived. Winter was here, and the Wehrmacht was unprepared. And now, America was in the fight. If Hitler had listened to Gehlen, would history have changed? Comment 1 if you think Germany could have won. Comment 2 if you believe the Soviet victory was inevitable. From a strategic perspective, the war was over. Germany could not win. They might fight for years and cause more horrific destruction, but the end was written. One thought began to consume Gehlen. If Germany is going to lose, I need to survive. And to survive in the post-war world, I need to be valuable. This obsession would drive Gehlen in the coming years, leading him to a fateful decision in the spring of 1942. The spring of 1942 arrived late on the Eastern Front. As the snow thawed, it revealed fields of mud and thousands of frozen corpses left over from the previous winter. The Wehrmacht had just survived the most horrific season in German military history. More than 200,000 men had died from the cold, disease, and Soviet counterattacks, while hundreds of thousands more were wounded or incapacitated. But the Soviet Union had also paid a staggering price. The Red Army lost over 3 million men in 1941 alone. While their winter counterattacks pushed the Germans back, they failed to destroy them. Both sides were exhausted, needing time to reorganize for the summer. Yet, in this relative lull, a quiet revolution was taking place at German high command. Hitler realized the Wehrmacht had been fighting blind. Intelligence on the Soviet Union was inexcusably poor. They had no idea how many reserve divisions the Red Army possessed, the output of the arms factories in the Urals, or where the next counterstrike would land. The Military Intelligence Unit for the East, known as FHO, Fremde Heere Ost, was in shambles. Its former chief had been sacked for catastrophic forecasting errors. A new leader was needed, someone with a sharp analytical mind and superior organizational skills. General Franz Halder looked to Reinhard Gehlen. In April 1942, Gehlen was summoned to Berlin. At just 40 years old and holding the rank of lieutenant colonel, he was suddenly handed the keys to the most critical intelligence department in the German military. He was promoted to brigadier general and officially took command on April 1, 1942. When Gehlen took over the FHO, he found a mess. The department consisted of about 30 officers, most lacking professional intelligence training. Files were disorganized. Gehlen rebuilt the system from the ground up. Within months, the FHO transformed from a chaotic office into a professional intelligence machine. Staffing surged to 300 by late 1942 and to 500 by 1943. They worked 12 to 16 hours a day, analyzing mountains of data and producing meticulous reports. In the summer of 1942, Hitler launched a new campaign in southern Russia aimed at seizing the Caucasus oil fields. He was convinced the Red Army was broken. He believed one more heavy blow would trigger a total Soviet collapse. But Gehlen's reports told a different story. The Red Army was rebuilding at lightning speed. Ural factories were churning out tanks and aircraft at an astonishing rate. New divisions were forming constantly. Soviet potential remained massive. Gehlen submitted these findings to Hitler through Halder. Hitler read them and flew into a rage. He trusted his gut over data, believing in willpower over objective reality. By mid-1942, German forces pushed toward the Volga and the Caucasus. Initially, the campaign moved well. They seized vast territories and reached the city of Stalingrad. Instead of bypassing the city, Hitler ordered its capture for the symbolic reason that it bore Stalin's name. The Battle of Stalingrad began in August 1942 and quickly devolved into a brutal urban meat grinder. The city became a graveyard of rubble, yet the fighting never ceased. Gehlen issued a stark warning. The flanks of the Stalingrad front were guarded by poorly equipped Romanian and Italian troops. If the Soviets struck there, they could shatter the line and encircle the entire German army in the city. Hitler dismissed the warnings as paranoia. He insisted the Red Army was incapable of a large-scale offensive and ordered the fight for Stalingrad to continue at any cost. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus. Over 1 million Red Army troops slammed into the flanks exactly where Gehlen had warned. The Romanian and Italian lines collapsed in days. Soviet armor tore into the rear. By late November, the entire 6th Army was encircled. Hitler forbade a breakout and promised an aerial resupply that never materialized. The Germans died slowly of hunger and cold. On February 2, 1943, the German forces surrendered. The losses were staggering: 150,000 dead, 90,000 captured. It was the Wehrmacht's greatest defeat to date. An entire army was annihilated. The myth of German invincibility was shattered, and the strategic balance shifted permanently toward the Soviet Union. Post-Stalingrad, Gehlen's prestige within the military staff soared. Generals began paying closer attention to FHO reports. Hitler, however, remained suspicious, frequently dismissing Gehlen's analyses as too pessimistic. On July 5, 1943, Germany launched Operation Citadel against the Soviet lines at Kursk, only to run headlong into a fortress-like defensive system. The campaign climaxed in the massive tank battle at Prokhorovka, involving 1,500 tanks in a scene of absolute carnage. By July 13th, Hitler called off the offensive, nominally due to the Allied landings in Sicily, but in reality, because the attack had failed. From that summer onward, the Red Army was in a state of continuous advance. The Wehrmacht fought a desperate step-by-step retreat, but could not stem the tide. By late 1944, as the Eastern Front moved toward German soil, Gehlen made a bold and dangerous move. He ordered the entire FHO intelligence library on the Soviet Union to be copied onto microfilm. Everything: files on commanders, weaponry, industrial capacity, transport networks, and headquarters. Thousands of pages were shrunk onto film and packed into small metal canisters. It was a time-consuming secret operation. If questioned, Gehlen claimed it was a backup to protect data from Allied air raids. But his true intent was survival. He realized the war was lost. As a general for the losing side, he faced execution or a lifetime in a POW camp. However, if he possessed something valuable to the victors, he could bargain for his life and perhaps his career. The most valuable asset he had was his knowledge of the USSR, information the West would surely crave once the common enemy Hitler was gone. Gehlen read the geopolitical tea leaves. He knew the alliance between the West and the Soviets was temporary. Once the Nazis were defeated, the friction between capitalism and communism would ignite, At that moment, America and Britain would need intelligence on the Soviets. This was Gehlen's life insurance policy. To execute it, he needed a hiding place. In March and April 1945, as the Red Army closed in on Berlin, Gehlen took the final step. He ordered his most trusted aides to pack the microfilm into 52 watertight steel safes. They trucked these crates into the Bavarian Alps near the remote Ellenswiese and buried them. Meanwhile, Berlin descended into final chaos. Hitler, hiding in his bunker, moved non-existent armies on maps and eventually chose suicide over surrender. On May 8th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. Gehlen and his associates retreated into the mountains, hiding in alpine cabins to avoid capture. But he knew hiding was not a long-term solution. 2 weeks after the surrender, Gehlen walked out of the forest and turned himself in to the Counterintelligence Corps, CIC. At an interrogation center, he met American intelligence officers and began to negotiate. He told them bluntly, "The United States is blind regarding the Soviet Union." In exchange for freedom and protection for himself and his team, Gehlen offered his entire 3-year archive of Soviet intelligence, their organization, their potential, and a still active spy network. Despite the massive moral controversy, the Americans' desperate need for information won out. After extensive debriefings in the U.S. proved his worth, a formal agreement was signed in December 1945. It marked the beginning of a Cold War intelligence alliance. In June 1946, Gehlen returned to Germany with American funding and a new mission: rebuild the intelligence network against the Soviet Union. Reinhard Gehlen's second life was about to begin. From Hitler's general to a Western ally, his life-or-death gamble had paid off. In the summer of 1946, Reinhard Gehlen returned to Germany. He was no longer a general of the disbanded Wehrmacht. He was not a prisoner of war, even though millions of his former comrades were still rotting in camps. The Germany he returned to was unrecognizable. The country was carved into 4 occupation zones controlled by the US, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Major cities were literal piles of rubble. Millions of homeless refugees wandered the ruins searching for food and shelter. But for Gehlen, this chaos was an opportunity. In the wreckage of the old world, he could build a new power structure without the oversight of a peacetime government. Gehlen's first mission was to recover his buried treasure. Escorted by American intelligence officers, he returned to the Bavarian Alps. They dug and successfully recovered the 52 steel safes. When opened, the microfilm was perfectly preserved. Thousands of pages documenting the Red Army, Soviet military structures, commanders, and weaponry. American experts verified the archives and confirmed their immense value. With this data as his capital, Gehlen had the leverage to start his operation. But he needed more than just paper. He needed people. Gehlen began recruiting his old associates from the FHO. Many had survived and were hiding across the country. Some were in POW camps, others were working manual labor jobs just to stay alive. When word spread that Gehlen was building a new organization under American protection, they flocked to him. These were men with deep experience in intelligence, experts at interrogating sources, analyzing data, and running spy networks. Most importantly, they shared a powerful motivation: a visceral hatred of communism and a profound fear of the Soviet Union. In December 1946, the Gehlen Organization was officially established in Pullach, a suburb of Munich. Located in the American occupation zone for security, Gehlen set up headquarters in a 3-story building surrounded by high fences and armed guards. Its official cover was an industrial development consultancy. The sign at the gate made no mention of intelligence. Inside, Gehlen reconstructed the wartime FHO structure. There were departments for analysis, field operations, counterintelligence, and logistics. The organization grew rapidly. By the early 1950s, the org employed over 4,000 official staff and thousands of informants. Their primary mission: gather intelligence on the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Their first major success came in 1948 during the Berlin blockade. In June 1948, the Soviets cut off all land routes into West Berlin. The U.S. responded with the Berlin airlift, flying in food and fuel for 2 million citizens. Reinhard Gehlen provided a crucial piece of intelligence. The Soviets were not planning to go to war over Berlin. As long as the US avoided military provocation, the Soviets would not escalate. This intel gave President Truman the confidence to maintain the airlift without the immediate fear of sparking World War III. After 11 months, the Soviets backed down. Gehlen's prestige skyrocketed. In 1954, the political landscape shifted. West Germany was gradually reclaiming its sovereignty. Chancellor Konrad Adenauer entered negotiations with the United States to transfer the Gehlen Organization to German government control. The deal was finalized. The organization would be handed over, provided it continued to work in lockstep with the CIA. Consequently, Gehlen was set to become the head of the nation's official intelligence agency. On April 1, 1956, the Federal Intelligence Service, the BND, was officially established. Reinhard Gehlen became its first president, holding a rank equivalent to an undersecretary. This was the zenith of Gehlen's power. Once a general of a defeated army, he was now the head of the intelligence apparatus for a nation rising as a European economic powerhouse. But the peak is also where the decline begins. During the days of the Gehlen Organization, operations were lean and agile. However, as a state agency, the BND became shackled by complex bureaucratic red tape. Furthermore, Gehlen valued family ties and old friends over actual competence. He filled key positions within the BND with his own relatives, cousins, nephews, and sons-in-law were placed in sensitive roles, not because they were gifted, but because Gehlen believed only family could be truly loyal. This blatant nepotism sparked internal resentment and gutted the morale of the agency's truly talented officers. The BND slowly devolved into an old boys club, where who you knew mattered more than what you could do. Gehlen was also dangerously fixated on gathering intel on the enemy, completely neglecting a mission just as vital: protecting his own house. The BND's counterintelligence wing was weak, underfunded, and overlooked. Heinz Felfa became the most typical and catastrophic example of this failure. Felfa joined the BND in 1951, back when it was still the organization. He was a former officer under Hitler who had spent several years in a Soviet POW camp after the war. When Gehlen began his recruitment drive, Felfa applied and was hired based on his intelligence experience. Reinhard Gehlen trusted Felfa implicitly, often entrusting him with top-secret missions and viewing him as a pillar of the BND. In reality, Felfa had been a KGB mole since 1951. During his time in the Soviet camps, he had agreed to work for Soviet intelligence. Over 15,000 classified documents were copied by Felfa and handed over to the KGB. The identities of hundreds of BND agents were compromised. Many were captured and executed. Operational plans were sabotaged before they even left the drawing board. Finally, in late 1961, an internal investigation was launched. Felfa was caught red-handed as he prepared to pass documents to his KGB handler. Felfa stood trial in 1963 and was sentenced to 14 years in prison, but the damage was irreparable. The BND's networks across Eastern Europe lay in ruins. The agency's reputation was shattered, and the CIA lost all faith in its German partner. Most significantly, the legend of Gehlen himself collapsed. On May 1, 1968, Reinhard Gehlen officially retired from the BND. He retreated to his home by Lake Starnberg, where he would spend his final years in relative seclusion. At 66, Gehlen sat in his private study, looking out over the still waters of the lake. After 26 years of relentless work, he finally had time to reflect. His twilight years were marked by isolation and failing health. On June 8, 1979, Reinhard Gehlen died of heart failure at his home in Starnberg. He was 77 years old